Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Tim Gray. I'm Executive Director at Environmental Defense. Just before we get going tonight, I'd like to say that I'm in Toronto, which is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. But many of you are calling in from other locations, so I encourage you to introduce yourself and where you're calling in from in the chat. And I see many of you are already doing that. Highway 413, if it ever gets built, and we sure are working to make sure that doesn't happen, primarily impacts the territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the other Williams Treaty First Nations, and the Wendat. And recent reporting on the highway suggests that proposed early works on this highway are going to violate fundamental Indigenous consultation rights of these communities. And we'll get into that a little bit more this evening. I'd like to introduce the two folks that you're going to be hearing from this evening, in addition to me. And the first one, after I give a little bit of a background on where we're at, is Phil Pothen, who's our Program Manager, Land Use and Ontario Environment, and also our in-house counsel on land use planning issues. Also, Janine D'Outremont, who is a member of Halton Hills Climate Action. She's a mom, a grandma, a writer-editor, a yoga instructor, I'm sure many other things. And we're really glad to have her with us today to talk about the grassroots efforts to push back against the proposed highway. So I just want to dive right into the agenda for this evening. I'm going to review the timeline of the impact assessment changes for 413. Then we're going to go into what's going on with the provincial government's Bill 212, which we like to call the Enhancing Gridlock Bill. And then we're going to switch to talking about what we can do to actually stop all this stuff from playing out. So let's go to the next slide, which really is about what has gone over time with Highway 413. So now this looks like on my screen it's hard to see. Hopefully it's a little easier for you. But this highway has been around as a proposal for a long time. About, oh God, I guess 22 years at the very beginning. This is part of the grand plan that has emerged over the decades from the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario to just keep building concentric 4-lane 400 series highways out from the city of Toronto. So 401, 407, then it was going to be 413. It was going to attach to the Mid-Peninsula Highway, which was going to run along the Niagara Escarpment. And there is still plans on the books to have 413 and the Bradford Bypass continue all the way along the south shore of Lake Simcoe. So this is kind of idea that we're just going to sequentially cover Southern Ontario in 4-lane highways and low density development. So that's kind of the way that MTO thinks about these things. Fortunately, the previous provincial government decided that this was a bad idea, and they canceled Highway 413. In 2018, the current provincial government and Premier Ford said, no, we're going to actually bring all that back, and we're going to build Highway 413. And we're going to do that because a lot of the folks that want sprawl do not want compact, sustainable cities, don't want housing built inside of cities, want sprawl. They really like the idea of a big highway that will service all of this. So they brought it back. And then in May of 2021, so this is 3 years after the highway has been resurrected from the dead, the federal minister of environment, so at that time that was John Wilkinson, he looked at this highway and looked at the decisions that had been made before, looked at the massive opposition coming from the public, from municipalities, looked at the impacts that would occur on federal values such as species at risk, such as navigable waters, First Nation rights, and said, no, this thing needs a review. So he designated it for an impact assessment under federal legislation. Then nothing happens for 2 years because the ball is in the province's court. In order to proceed with this impact assessment, the province needed to complete what's called an initial project description. They needed to actually come forward with a proposal to the federal government about how they're going to address all of these environmental concerns. They never did that. They just sat on their hands. And then eventually, the Alberta government, and later joined by the provincial government here in Ontario, files a court challenge against the Impact Assessment Act overall. And the Supreme Court, in their great wisdom, finds parts of it to be unconstitutional. As a result, the federal government, in the spring of 2024, so that's this year, early this spring, drops the impact assessment based on concerns that if they don't, it's going to go to court, and maybe a bunch of their impact assessments across the country are not going to be able to go forward. However, just 2 months later, based on the advice given to them by the Supreme Court, the federal government changes and amends the Impact Assessment Act, maintaining all of the reasons that they could proceed to designate 413 for an impact assessment that they originally used back in May of 2021. So today, in November of 2024, we have a new Impact Assessment Act that's been revised, that is no longer challenged constitutionally, that the federal government can use to designate this highway under the Impact Assessment Act. They are fully able to make a decision again to designate the highway for all of the regions I spoke about previously, which are its impact on areas of federal legislative responsibility: species at risk, navigable waters, impact on First Nations, and other values. And then, and we're going to dive into this in more detail, just in October of 2024, the provincial government introduces Bill 212. And within that, they declare that they're going to exempt the highway from the Provincial Environmental Assessment Act. So they're not going to complete the requirements of that legislation to look at the impacts and look at alternatives. They're going to exempt the highway so that they can move to build it very quickly. Now, the whole legislative regime that the federal government works under for impact assessment seeks to minimize duplication. So if provinces have environmental assessments underway on major projects that could properly address federal values, then they like to defer to those provinces, especially for projects that are provincially led. So basically the province, by Ontario introducing the Bill 212, are saying to the federal government, your values, the thing you're concerned about, those species at risk, those Indigenous values, those navigable waters, all those rivers, the migratory birds that exist there, we don't care. We're not even going to complete a provincial level environmental assessment about their impacts. Too bad for you. So it puts the ball firmly back in the federal government's court to protect those values using their own legislation. So we and many others, so us at Environmental Defense and many others, have requested the federal government to do just that, to designate this highway once again, start the process to involve the public, look at science, look at alternatives, look at all of the things that the province have done to ignore the impacts of this highway, and to make a decision on that. And the rules are such that the federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, who's now Stephen Guilbeault, has 90 days from the time the requests are received. And we now have confirmation from the Impact Assessment Act that that 90-day period for him to make a decision, either yay or nay, expires on January 19th, 2025. So between now and 60 some odd days from now, it's up to the minister to review all of the evidence, review the evidence of the province dismissing environmental concerns. I think you may have seen the premier in the media saying that there's nothing there but a bunch of grasshoppers, and he's not too concerned about it. To take that into full account to make his decision about whether or not this highway needs a proper review. So that's where we're at. That's the situation to date, and leads us right into answering any questions that we might have from you about where we're at in this process before we move into a deeper exploration of what some of the implications of Bill 212 would be. So Matt, I think, is going to help coordinate our Q&A session here, and I can help answer questions that are coming up about where we're at in the process here.
Yeah, if people have questions about the process, you can put them into the chat now, and I'll kind of compile them if we get a lot. I did see one earlier that someone was asking if there were any traffic studies about whether a highway outside Toronto would ease congestion in Toronto. It's sort of about concentric highways and urban congestion.
Yeah, the information that's available from MTO, and this was in the media recently, showed that Highway 413 was going to do virtually nothing to change the trajectory of gridlock in the GTHA. And in fact, the expert panel, when they were looking at this issue, and this is part of the reason that the highway was canceled, is that their estimation, based on all the material they were able to look at over about a 1.5 year period, was it was going to make about 30 seconds of difference to the average driver at a regional level. So we know that building more highways just attracts more traffic. It's something called induced demand, and that we could expect that if you continue to rely on highways and cars, that you will continue to have gridlock. We also know, of course, that from a study that we commissioned, that we could do something to ease immediately some of the congestion on the 401. Now, this may not last forever either if we're not doing something meaningful about increasing public transit in the region, but that we could get trucks off the 401 by putting them onto the 407 right now, if the provincial government be willing to pay some of those tolls, because the trucks won't take the 407 because it's too expensive. So we could do something right away, but it would only be temporary, because of course the highway 401 would fill up again. But we could get a lot of the trucks off the 401 for the next number of years by opening up the 407, while we invest heavily in the kind of regional public transit that we need to really remove more people from the highways, get them out of their cars, and give them alternatives.
Great, thanks. I'm seeing lots of questions actually, but at least a couple of them are sort of about what the impact assessment would actually do, whether it would end the highway, or how long it will take, that kind of question.
Yeah, in terms of how long it would take, it's kind of open-ended. The last time we were in this situation, after the designation in 2021, nothing really happened until the legal decision. So 3 years in, the province had still not completed its initial project description of how it was going to proceed to present its case to the federal government. So if the province doesn't do its homework, then it could just take years and years. But once that initial project description is approved by the federal government, public consultation begins, the examination of impacts occurs, looking at mitigation options, looking at route changes, identifying values that are going to be damaged and therefore need to be avoided or mitigated. All that process then gets underway. There are fixed timelines about that, but this would take years for sure once it gets started.
Great, thanks. I'm going to combine a couple questions again. One person was asking about the memorandum of understanding and if that's still in effect, and someone else was asking saying that their MP has said that it's out of their hands because of the Supreme Court decision. So I think those are sort of related. So if you could answer those, that'd be great.
Yes, the memorandum of understanding is still in play. The memorandum of understanding is very explicit, that says both levels of government retain the right to undertake whatever processes that they see fit And we also know from communication with the federal officials that they were not informed that the provincial government was about to exempt this highway from their own legislation. So the federal government is completely free to redesignate this highway under that memorandum of understanding. And the second question, saying that there's no legal ability to do this because of the Supreme Court ruling, is just false. If MPs are telling you that, then they're not telling you the truth. There is new legislation in place, new Impact Assessment Act. All the grounds for designation that were originally in the Act are still there, and the Act, in fact, can be designated. And that's proven by the fact that our submission to the agency was not rejected. They did not say to us, oh, this is something that we can't do because the legislation doesn't allow it. It said that the agency is going to review the evidence, review what's has gone on since the spring, and will respond about a decision by the minister by January 19th. So if the process did not allow designation, they would have said that very clearly and did not.
Great, thanks. There's unfortunately so many questions we won't be able to get to them, but one I did see come up a couple times is about a change of federal government and what that might mean for an impact assessment if it started already.
Yes, we're probably going to have an election in the fall of 2025, as far as anyone's best guess. Of course, it could happen anytime in a minority government, but it seems like it's most likely to happen then. The impact assessment, if it's designated, could be canceled by a future government. And of course, we also are likely to have an election in the spring here in Ontario, a provincial election. And all of the opposition parties, of course, have committed to canceling the highway project overall. So we have two kind of variables out there in the electoral map. One is the provincial election, and then one is the fall federal election.
Great, thanks. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all the questions. I will try to save the chat and answer some of them in the follow-up email. And also we'll have a couple other question periods. So especially things about the provincial level, maybe we can get to during the Bill 212.
Great, thanks, Matt. And now we're going to turn to Phil, who's going to lead us through a presentation of what's going on with Bill 212, the Enhancing Gridlock Bill, and also take some of your questions around that, and then we'll move to Janine after that.
Hi, folks. So I'm here to bring you up to date on how the government's proposed Bill 212 strengthens the substantive case for a fresh and independent federal impact assessment of the Highway 413 scheme. And also on how you should be using Bill 212 in your advocacy when you've cornered your government caucus MP and you're twisting their arms to do their jobs and grant a request for assessment. So I'm going to start by, though, touching briefly on the parts of Bill 212 that fall more squarely within provincial jurisdiction and engage with our own environmental protection work at Environmental Defense. That includes the draconian attack on active transportation infrastructure that would kill the huge numbers of infill mid-rise homes, and the provisions that would break the government's Greenbelt promise once again by effectively carving the 413 route out of the Greenbelt. Slide. But then I'm going to dig into the elements that really do remove the last possible fig leaves that anyone in the federal government could use as an excuse for refusing our push for federal impact assessment, the push that we think is about to bear fruit. So the attack on protected bike lanes is the part of Bill 212 that by design, you'll probably have heard of already. So Bill 212 would make it illegal for municipal governments to create any protected bike lane that involves reducing the number of lanes that are open to trucks and SUVs and cars. And it would require municipal governments to submit to provincial review of existing lanes and the post description of planned accompanying regulations suggest that they are going to be designed to enable the government to forcibly rip out lanes that have already become backbones of goods movement in many of our municipalities, and especially in Toronto. There simply isn't room on a lot of the routes that the government wants to target to carry all the deliveries we'll need if they need to be carried in future by car and van, not by bikes. The bikes and the bike lanes are the thing that are allowing the transportation system to continue functioning in the midst of the transportation chaos that's being caused by all the subway construction and other construction in Toronto in particular. Next slide, please. But the part of this that isn't top of mind for people who haven't read our new mid-rise manual report, which I encourage you to look at if you just Google legalizemidrise.ca, is that blocking and ripping out bike lanes will kill thousands of new units of housing that municipalities have already zoned for, especially the city of Toronto. It's just not going to be viable to build on a lot of the 30,000 or so lots that Toronto has proactively zoned for mid-rise development. And it's not going to be possible for Southern Ontario to deliver the 1.7 million homes that we're going to need overall by 2031 if most of those new apartments are going to need to include parking. That means not just removing the legal requirement to include parking, which, for example, Mayor Chow in Toronto has done, but it also means making it possible, making sure there are safe, appealing last mile alternatives, including after hours, so that it's practical to live in these places without a car. Unless we do that, then a lot of that housing that the city wants to promote is going to remain unbuilt. Next slide. Another appalling aspect of Bill 212 that you may have heard about, that's going to be really serious from the point of anyone who cares about the environment or anyone who's been a part of our Hands Off the Greenbelt campaign, which was successful, is that Bill 212 would effectively carve the Greenbelt, the 413 route out of the Greenbelt. According to Bill 212, if it is passed, Bill 413 would not need to Highway 413 would not need to conform with the Greenbelt plan. So that means that there would be no duty to avoid natural heritage features unless there's no reasonable alternative. And there would be no duty to choose locations and designs that minimize natural heritage system, water crossings, and coverage of land in the Greenbelt. These are all things that would be required if the 413 route were subject to the Greenbelt plan. That's why we say Bill 212, if passed, would effectively carve the Greenbelt route out of the the 413 route out of the Greenbelt. And this is an implicit admission to what environmental defense has been flagging for a long time, which is that the proposed route is, and the government knows it is, more damaging than the available alternatives. There'd be no need to exempt 413 from the Greenbelt plan if they didn't know that they were intentionally choosing a route that was more damaging. Next slide, please. So now on to the parts of Bill 212 that are of most direct relevance to you, because this is a 413 presentation. So Bill 212, and this is an inadvertent side effect from the government's point of view, it really removes the last remaining fig leaf that any Liberal MP might have been able to rely on before in claiming that they didn't really think they needed to designate Highway 413 for impact assessment. We've already been very clear that the fix was already in. The government provincially was not going to do a proper assessment of 413 impacts. And that's why we've said all along that federal interests cannot be protected without a full and independent federal impact assessment. But one of the, if we just change slides, one of the fig leaves that was relied upon by 413 proponents in claiming that it wasn't really necessary or that it would be an overstep or duplication for the federal government to designate 413 for impact assessment is that there was technically a provincial Environmental Impact Assessment Act. 413 removes that fig leaf. Canada cannot claim now to be relying on provincial impact assessment to address federal jurisdiction issues because the Highway 413 under 212 would be exempted from provincial environmental impact assessment altogether. There is a sort of funny Potemkin simulacra of a process, but it's nothing that anyone could plausibly believe would be a substitute for federal impact assessment, even if they were utterly naive, in part because of an early works exemption, which means that the government would try to commit itself to a route and to building the highway before any impact assessment or even the superficial assessment happened. So the most important changes, or the most important alternatives that any assessment of federal impacts would evaluate would be not building a highway in this area at all. That's based on what we heard about the Red Side Dace recovery strategy, and on changing the specific route of the highway to minimize impact. Both of those options would effectively be excluded by the fake process that the province is pursuing now. Next slide, please. So what this means specifically and separately, the federal government cannot rely or claim to be relying on the province to discharge its duty to consult. Previously, you might have heard from Highway 413 proponents that the federal government didn't need a full federal impact assessment in order to discharge its duty to consult because the province would simply handle it. Well, the government with Bill 212 has said that they will not have a meaningful Indigenous consultation regarding 413. Meaningful consultation means that the decision about the route and whether to proceed with 413 at all are conditional upon the free, prior, informed consent of Indigenous nations. But Bill 212 would allow the quote unquote early works for 413 to start before Indigenous consultations are even initiated, which means that Indigenous consultations would be purely a rubber stamp formality. There would be no way, if the government has its way, for the Indigenous consultations to result in the highway not being built, or the government choosing a different route. And that means it wouldn't be a real consultation. Part of the reason for trying to allow these quote unquote early works to happen early on is it may be to try and make it harder for the government to designate the entire 413 project for a singular impact assessment. We think there are already workarounds for that, but it's another reason for the government to pull the trigger now and designate for impact assessment. Next slide, please. And thirdly, because if Bill 212 passes, the federal government will have no pretext whatsoever for claiming that is relying on provincial processes to protect or to deal with matters of federal jurisdiction, in particular, the protection of federally listed fish species. So the federal government has enumerated, written down, spelled out in black and white in the Constitution, jurisdiction over inland fish species. And one of those fish species is the endangered red-side dace. This removal of the provincial impact assessment and this other provision, section 6 sub 4 and section 13, would mean that the federal government could not claim that a provincial process will be revealing the same information or even providing the minister with the information required to make decisions about Endangered Species Act permits or navigable waters permits. Those things, that's because, according to Bill 212, if it passes, the provincial government would keep any studies of environmental conditions or assessment of impacts secret wherever they contain information about sensitive natural or cultural heritage matters. So that means that the very issues that are directly necessary to protecting federal interests, protecting the environment, would be kept secret if 212 is passed. And any changes to the 413 proposal would even be exempt from the Environmental Bill of Rights, which means that we wouldn't even know about them. They wouldn't be posted on the ERO. So essentially, we could be sold a pig in the poke. The original plan could be changed after the fact without anyone knowing about it and with radically different environmental consequences. Thanks, folks.
Thanks so much, Phil. Yeah, if people could put their questions about Bill 212 into the chat. I did see one from the earlier section that I think is relevant to this, which was about the expropriation of farmland and residential land, whether it started or not, what the process would be there.
So we are not aware, and I admit, we are not omniscient, but we are not aware that such expropriations have started yet. It doesn't mean it isn't the case. This legislation does include quite a few provisions that are designed to facilitate expropriation. And I think, again, part of the reason they put the bike lanes piece in here is to distract from things that would really frustrate and anger the government's own property rights base. Because there are a lot of restrictions on the ability of landowners to resist not just having their land expropriated, but resist having government workers enter their property, do work on their property. There's really, and very, very severe financial penalties for anyone who interferes with the government coming onto the property.
Great, thank you. Someone's asking if the feds might be waiting for Bill 212 to be passed before they designate the highway, or what the relationship there is.
I mean, it may be. Certainly, if Bill 212 passes, there will be a slam dunk political case, even more than there was already, for the federal government to designate Highway 413 for full impact assessment. But there already was, in our view, a slam dunk political case. There was just no way to discharge federal responsibility, to do the federal government's job without an independent federal impact assessment. This is not about asking the federal government to interfere in provincial jurisdiction or override the province. This is just the federal government will be deciding to just give up on its own responsibilities if it doesn't designate for impact assessment.
Great, and then someone was asking if they don't designate for impact assessment, is there any kind of recourse, I guess, either judicial or otherwise, or at the provincial level?
Potentially. I don't like to talk about those things, especially as council, as to what we would do, but certainly we would consider those kinds of options. But it's worth noting too that one of the reasons that federal impact assessment is so important is that the minister also has the duty to deny federal Species at Risk Act permits. So that means deny any permits to do work that would affect the red-side dace or other federal species at risk in the area. The independent federal impact assessment is important to providing a more solid evidentiary basis for that decision, for making a full decision. But without the federal impact assessment, by default, we would say the federal government's duty is to refuse all such permits. So that means that the federal government should be, the fisheries minister and the Ministry of Environment should be refusing endangered species or Species at Risk Act permits, and they should be refusing navigable waters permits for the site, and that should really hamstring the project.
Great.
And so that's what we'd be asking for, regardless of how the impact assessment turns out. And it is our expectation, we have no reason to expect that the federal government will do anything other than designate this project for impact assessment. There's a reason, we think, why the minister changed the act to allow them to once again designate this project for impact assessment. They didn't have to do that, they chose to. There's a reason why the minister approved a Red Side Dace recovery strategy, which clearly identifies the route for this highway as a place that really can't be interfered with very much if the Red Side Dace is going to survive. There were clear consequences to that. The minister and the government have really knowingly, we think, painted themselves into a corner where there's not really any excuse for them to refuse to designate. So we expect it, and I think you have a right to be shocked and angry and pour out your rage on your MP if you find that they don't, because really it would be a shock to us. It would be a surprise. And I think for now, you just need to give them the strength that they need to not be scared to do the right thing, to do what they've set themselves up to do. So that means you do lean on your local MP. You say, listen, we hear that you're all ready to do this. Some people might be trying to scare you off from doing it, but I want to tell you, we support you in doing this, and we'll be very angry if you don't.
Great, thanks for that. I think that's most of the sort of Bill 212 questions. There are some other questions, but we'll have one more question period about how to take action. So I think we're good for now.
Great. Thanks so much, Phil. We're going to move now to Janine, who's going to talk about all of the things that are going on the ground and the things you can be involved with and how we can stop this disaster from unrolling across our countryside. Janine.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. I'm Janine from Halton Hills Climate Action. We're a small grassroots group of about 24 active members that started in 2019. And our mission is to influence politicians at the 4 levels of government to get serious about climate action. And we're split into 2 teams, a town team and a Trillium team that focuses on federal and provincial matters, and that's the one that I'm involved with. And so our current project is trying to stop Highway 413. Next slide, please. So I just want to quickly tell a little success story from about a year ago when the government tried to put another gas plant in our community. And the vote was happening at council, and we got together, and about a dozen of us delegated to the council meeting along with a high school student you can see in the picture. We also had a local business owner write a really compelling letter saying why it would be a terrible idea for a new gas plant to be built. And they voted 9-2 against. So that was a huge win for us. So, and it got coverage in national media. So the point being, it doesn't take an army of people to make change. Next slide. So moving on to what we've been doing about 413. Back in the spring, we met with Milton Liberal MP Adam Van Koeverden in his office. He happens to be the parliamentary secretary to the Environment Minister, and we discussed our concerns about the highway with him at that time. He was very receptive to our concerns and kept the door open, and we actually have another meeting scheduled with him this week. We also met with our local MPP, Ted Arnott, who's the Speaker of the House, and he suggested we write letters and start a petition. So that's what we did. So we launched our Stop the 413 petition in June and decided that we would just go to every place where a lot of people were gathering, where we would collect signatures, because we found out that the provincial government doesn't accept online signatures. They have to be paper, old-fashioned signatures. So we went to farmers markets, we went to Canada Day in Glen Williams, Go Green Halton Hills event, an EcoFest. We were part of the Seniors for Climate National Day of Action, and we collected signatures there. And our friends at Stop the 413 East End Toronto collected over 500 signatures for us. So they were hard at work over the summer, helping us get signatures on the petition. And here's just a couple of pictures of us in action, different events. And this was from the National Day of Action. We had a rally. It actually rained that day. We were going to have an outdoor event, but we had made plans to move it indoors. So the rain let up at the end so we could have a little outdoor rally along the main drag. And this is our fearless leader, Jane Fogel, one of our founders, speaking to a crowd at the event on October 1st. So what results did we get from our actions so far? Well, we collected more than 1,200 signatures on our petition. We asked Ontario Greens leader Mike Schreiner to present it for us, which he did on November 1st in the legislature. Many folks we talked to thought the highway was a done deal. Most people were well aware of it and were opposed to it, but didn't think there was anything that could be done about it. So we told them, no, it's not a done deal. We talked to hundreds of people, and we also distributed postcards from Environmental Defense that can be sent to MPs to protect species at risk. We gave out literature so people could learn more about, you know, all the negative impacts of the highway. And we distributed lawn signs. So there's quite a few lawn signs around the community. And here's Mike delivering our petition. And most recently, we drafted a letter to Stephen Guilbeault, copied to the Prime Minister, the other relevant ministers, and the President of the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, just outlining our concerns about Bill 212 and the highway, and asking that the project be redesignated for federal impact assessment. The letter was signed by 9 other local grassroots organizations around the GTHA, including the David Suzuki Foundation. And we sent that off on November 11th, and we're awaiting a response. So what can you do? Well, you can call your MP and your MPP and let them know you're opposed to the highway. You can send an email briefly stating your concerns about the project and why it matters to you. And it doesn't have to be long. You don't have to be an expert on all of the things that Phil talked about or the history. Just speak from the heart and say why it matters to you. You can set up a meeting with your MP, particularly if you have a Liberal MP and your MPP. And there are rallies happening this Friday in Orangeville and in Milton that you can participate in. And I would just like to leave you with this thought. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. That's the Dalai Lama. So what you do does make a difference. You may not think that small actions make a difference, but they all add up, and they do. So, and it feels good to take action rather than not doing anything.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jen. Matt, how is our questions going?
A bunch of questions. I thought I would raise. I saw a couple people asking about the difference between a formal petition in the legislature versus an online petition. The ones we do online don't become formal petitions in the legislature. Those do need physical signatures, but they will automatically email usually your MPP, and they fill up their inbox, and their assistants see them. And we do know that they sort of tally those up. They might not always respond, but they really do say, oh, I got 5 of these today, or oh, I got 10 of these in a week. So they use it as a rough measure of how many people are concerned about it. So you might not always get an official response, but they do pay attention to those. And then I also saw some questions about working with farmers. So maybe, I don't know if Janine, you have experience working with farmers in the area, or maybe Tim also could take that on a little bit.
I don't personally, but yes, so I can't really speak to that.
Yeah, I'll just briefly answer. Yeah, we've worked with a lot of farm organizations. The Ontario Farmland Trust, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, National Farmers Union. All of them have been really involved in pushing back against this highway and against the sprawl that's tied to it in a big way. And then there are, of course, individual farmers all along the route as well that you've probably seen some of the stories in the media. I know that David Suzuki Foundation has been doing a lot of work with individual farm owners. So obviously the loss of farmland, not just the direct impact of this highway, but all of the surrounding sprawl that it's going to bring. And the disruption to the farm community is really devastating in terms of impact on very high quality farmland.
Great, thanks. Did you want to answer that one as well then, Phil?
Yeah, I was actually just following up on a question about, actually getting your MP to talk to you, following up on what Janine said. And I think an opportunity that will present itself over the next month in the lead up to the holidays is your MP will be around in your riding at these warm and fuzzy events. So for example, last weekend, I caught up with my MP at the Santa Claus parade in my neighborhood. And you just catch them in public and you put them on the spot and you just say in public in front of other people, I'm counting on you, to declare a full federal impact assessment of Highway 413. We can count on you to do it. They'll say something in response to it. If they're the typical politician, they'll try and act like they're saying yes, which will put pressure on them. Actually, this came from the mouth of my kid rather than me this time, which was fun. But yeah, just don't be polite. Catch them out when they're trying to get warm and fuzzies during the holiday season.
Thanks. There are a bunch of questions about who's best to contact. And also some people ask specifically if they have a Conservative MP at the federal level, if it's worth reaching out to them. So I think any of you probably have some input on that.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe go ahead, Janine.
I could say that our MP is Michael Chong, and he has told us that he's opposed to the highway. We did write to him, but he doesn't really have much say in it at this point.
Yeah, I think all MPPs and MPs matter. Michael Chong, for example, even though he's an opposition leader, him writing a letter to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change saying you should do an impact assessment, that'd be a valuable thing for him to do, especially if he posted that publicly. That would be really important. I also think that MPPs that are in the provincial government really do need to hear from constituents. I mean, we saw that during the whole Greenbelt fiasco. And ultimately, you will all recall when they had a caucus retreat, the MPPs said to the premier, "Okay, like we need this to be over. The pressure we're getting from our constituents, the rage that we're experiencing, really has to be addressed, and you need to think about reversing this," which they did. So it matters, even if it feels like government's already made up their mind. And then, of course, at the federal level, any Liberal MP is going to be able to talk to the minister, in Parliament or in the hallways and say, "Hey, my constituents really want you to do something to review the impacts of this highway. You really do need to designate it." So I think all levels make a difference. But our priority right now is to have the federal government really understand that the public wants them to do the right thing here and take their responsibilities seriously. So if you're only going to call, one, make it a federal MP for the next little while.
Seeing lots of talk, but I don't know if there's too many questions. If I've missed a question, we can go to get someone asked for a copy of your letter, Janine. So maybe if you could pass that on to me, I could put it into our follow-up email. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and someone in the chat is also saying a personal letter, not a form letter. The form letters they count them, but they'll take it more seriously if you write it in your own words. So yeah, fully agree that a personal letter or email is better. And a phone call is even better.
Yeah, and just to underscore that, Matt, because I think people sometimes just aren't aware of this, but an email is good because, as you said, they do count them up, and if they get a lot, then they really pay attention to that. A personal letter, whether that's emailed or actually written and mailed, either one of them, if it's very clear that it's something that you have sat down and written, is the next level up. And then, of course, a phone call. That is, people know in the office that you've really thought this through and you're willing to take the time to do that. And of course, requesting a meeting to talk about the issue is kind of the high bar for an MP or an MPP, because they know that this is something that lots of other people in their riding are concerned about. If there's people that actually want to have a meeting about it, especially if you can go with a friend or someone else, just to convey the level of concern you're hearing about the issue in the community. So that makes a big difference. All right, well, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I think we have addressed most of the questions, unless there's some others that have come up recently, Matt. But I just want to close by really thanking you for attending tonight and getting up to speed on what's going on, both with the highway itself and the process that's the opportunity that's in front of us for the federal government to do the right thing. I think we really want to underscore that if you are living in a riding where there's a federal government Liberal caucus member, that you get in touch with them. Call now and leave a message. If you want to talk to someone during office hours, we'll send a link in our click to call following with our follow-up email that's going to be coming out after this webinar. We also have postcards that can be mailed to MPs. And if you get in touch with Matt, he can mail you some postcards. Of course, that is going to be dependent a little bit on what's going on with the postal strike. But if you are able to distribute a bunch of them, we may be able to figure out another way of getting them to you if the postal strike continues. We don't want to forget to mention as well the upcoming rallies in Milton and Caledon on Friday, November 22nd about Bill 212. And we're also able to give you Stop 413 signs. They get a great reception at bike rallies and anything about Bill 212. So if you need more Stop 413 signs for your community or for upcoming rallies or anything else you're doing in your community, please get in touch with us and we can make sure we get all those out to you. There will be, as I mentioned, a follow-up email after this, and we'll be able to provide some of these materials and a link to this webinar so that you can share it with anyone who happened to miss it. That'll also, of course, be available online. So thanks so much. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Matt, with hosting and providing the questions. And thanks again so much to all of you for attending and all of the things you do and all the things you're going to do to help us stop this terrible highway. Have a great night. Cheers.